I'm Sean Yost for the theREALnews Network, and I'm having a conversation with Walter Lomax, who's director of the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative. Walter, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me, Sean.
So I want to talk a little bit about the backstory of the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative and your backstory specifically. Why don't we talk about the years you were incarcerated and the circumstances behind that incarceration?
Sean, I'm always reluctant to talk about my story, primarily because oftentimes it will overshadow the issue that we advocate on behalf of. I want to briefly describe that, but then I'd like to stick more to focus on the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative and why the work that we do. I was arrested in 1967 for a crime that I did not commit, and this was only found out after I had spent close to 4 decades incarcerated. And while I was incarcerated, I got an opportunity to meet a lot of the people that we advocate on behalf of. And because of changes in the system and policies while I was in there, we began working on to change the policy. And
the policy specifically, the policy?
Policy affecting folk that were serving long-term incarcerations and parole-eligible life sentences.
Okay.
And again, I got a chance to meet a lot of the people that we advocate on behalf of while I was there. So even though I was wrongly convicted and I was there for something I did not do, this does not mean that I was not subjected to all the same conditions that they were. And along the way, I began to meet the people as they were then, as opposed to how they were when the crimes may have been committed. And I realized that a lot of these folk really deserved a second chance. They deserved a meaningful opportunity to be released. And so I was fortunate to be released in 2006, that is. A judge looked at the evidence that was presented in my case. And
Judge Gail Raisin.
Judge Gail Raisin, correct. And she realized that it was really a bad conviction. She acknowledged at the time that she felt that I was innocent. And so she released me in 2006. And we formed the organization, the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative, in 2007 after meeting with some advocacy groups and some family members and friends of folk that are currently incarcerated or that were currently incarcerated at the time, and put together an agenda to move the issue forward. And then in 2011, we produced a documentary titled Blocking the Exit. And we was able to take that documentary to Annapolis with us and show it to the legislators because it was really about educating folk, because some of these legislators was not even elected officials during the time when these policies took effect. And so with that educational tool, it assisted us in getting legislation passed in 2011. However, the legislation didn't go far enough. It only gave the governor 180 days to decide on recommendation that comes before his office. And shortly after the legislation became effective in 2012, the governor at that time denied all of the petitions that it came before his office. And so the following year, well, actually, we went back before the legislators, but they said that the legislation hadn't been in effect long enough, and they wanted to give it an opportunity to see how it would work over time. But once the governor denied those petitions, they realized that it didn't matter. It was a political decision that he made.
Right.
And so we produced a report titled Still Blocking the Exit. And what it did was it began to profile these folk that had begun to be released in 2013 under what is called the Unger decision, following a court of Maryland Court of Appeals decision in 2012 that said that anyone that was convicted with a jury trial prior to 1980 is entitled to a new trial. And because it had been such an extended period of time, most jurisdictions decide to offer the individuals some type of plea agreement, and they were being released on probation between 2 to 5 years or better.
Let me ask you this, Walter. You made it clear that you went in 1967 for a crime you didn't commit. And so we talk a lot about the effects of segregation in Baltimore. And I think that you're in a unique position because in 1967, the city was it's obviously still one of the most segregated cities in the United States. But even in 2016, we still see that Baltimore is still one of the most segregated cities in the United States. Talk about the effect of segregation, the segregative effects of the effects of segregation on the criminal justice system, but more broadly the culture in Baltimore that helps kind of move forward or keep in place an oppressive kind of government setup. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, you're right. When I went to prison in 1967, I just recently read, because I didn't know at the time, is that at that time, in 1966, black police officers couldn't ride in vehicles and could only patrol African-American communities. And so this is what happened and was occurring back during that era. But what has happened over time, that even though the appearance that segregation no longer exists, but in fact, it still exists, greatly so. In fact, I think it was the case that they talked about Wells Fargo was still executing the red line philosophy as far as the loan was concerned. So if you have, over an extended period of time, this pocket of individuals existing in Pacific neighborhoods and communities, and then you see the patrolling of these neighborhoods and communities, and then you see the advent of drugs, other types of behavior begin to occur, and while these things are occurring, you see all the manufacturing jobs being systematically removed.
Right.
And so when you have this type of formula over a period of time, you can't help but deduce the type of hopelessness that exists in a lot of those neighborhoods and communities. And so on the surface, it would appear though, black president, black mayor, black state's attorney, black council people, that it no longer exists. But the fact of it is, it still exists, and it has produced the type of behavior that exists in those neighborhoods and communities with the sense of hopelessness. Specifically, if you have people that are occupying the community as if they are military force, as opposed to public services that are there to help the community.
Well, you talk about some of those effects, and I would argue, and I think a lot of people would say, that when we look at the uprising in last April, that was not, it was sparked by the death of Freddie Gray, perhaps, but what happened in those communities, what happened in West Baltimore during the uprising had been building for generations, quite frankly, speaking to what you're talking about, that systemic oppression and racism that has been in place in the city for so long and really has not changed all that much in the minds of a lot of people.
No, absolutely. Well, let me digress for just a second and move it to like another arena. Is that, and so there's the rhetoric that exists. If you have the vice president of the union that's going to call protesters and advocates thugs, and so that's
Gerhardt.
Gerhardt.
Right.
That's the mentality that exists at that level. Now you have the president of the United, well, a candidate, and I'm not going to call his name because I get headaches when I call this guy's name. But you had this megalomaniac that's talking about, I think we should be more hard on those people that's out there breaking the law, that's protesting. He's using the same rhetoric that Goldwater used on Johnson,
1964.
and that Nixon used, right? Is to say, these people, you blaming the victim here. These people who are protesting about being victimized and are seeking some type of justice. But you have this mentality that exists for someone at this level, and then you see what's being perpetuated actually in the neighborhoods, in the communities. So Freddie Gray did not cause that riot. The conditions that existed caused Freddie Gray's death and caused those riots. And to say that you're going to say that the state's attorney's prosecution or attempted prosecution of someone that's responsible for his death, if it was ruled a homicide and the man didn't kill himself, then what is she supposed to do? Whether she convict or not, her responsibility as an elected official is to indict. So if you have what's alleged to be folk who's going to be responsible for protecting us, that in fact is going to protect the people that's victimizing us, then what else could we expect from what we saw with Freddie Gray?
You also spoke of the fact that we've seen some changes politically. So we've had black mayors in the city. You mentioned a black president of the United States. The majority of the city council was black. But so there's this expectation I think people have that we should have a more progressive city. We should have a city that is more sensitive, if you will, to the plight of poor people, brown people, black people. But to a great extent, I think people don't see it that way. What do you say about the kind of expectation that black people in power, black people in office, should have a different disposition than maybe another community? What do you think about that?
Well, let me make this observation, Sean. When Mayor Kurt Smoke was elected as mayor of Baltimore City, and Governor Schaefer was the governor, and for the first term, full term of Mayor Smoke's term in office, he could not get one single thing done. Not one single thing done. Because Schaefer had a stranglehold on the power in the city. He was only able to marginally get some things done during his second term of office because of that strangle on the power hold. And that still exists. The people who control the money and the power are the ones that literally calls the shots. Now, we see this Port Covington. Now, most people think that it's a good idea. And from the sideline, I think that it has a lot of good to it. But on the other hand, some other people could potentially suffer. Now, before it's allowed to completely play out, and maybe time is of the essence as well, the power says, look, we're going to solve your concerns. So we have the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House is saying, look, don't worry about this school system. We're going to take care of that money there. Well, you know, you shouldn't have to say that after the fact or during this process. You should have been saying that up front. Don't say that. I mean, I'm not saying don't say that now, but why just say it to ensure that that moves through, see? Because I watched how, rest his soul, Pete Rollins, Mayor Rollins, his father, had wrestled with Peter Angelo when they was building that stadium to make sure that minority represented, that there was a minority representation there, that they actually was a part of that process where they could actually generate capital. And I watched after that stadium was built, that if you go down there right now, I would suffice it to say that you will not find any minorities that's actually benefiting from the profits that's being made down there. And that was a lot of money that went to build that stadium.
We're going to have to make that the last word for right now. I want to thank Walter Lomax, Director of the Maryland Restorative Justice Initiative. Thank you, Walter.
Thank you for inviting me, Sean. I hope they don't lock me up when I leave out here.
I'm Sean Yost for the Real News Network.